going on, the border wall, that they got the money for that. That's a big priority. And here's something very fascinating that we've been having this conversation all over the weekend. The U.S. Postal Service gets $10 billion, a coronavirus relief loan, which is good, after months of negotiations and attacks by Trump. So here's the interesting connection here. When it comes to the border wall, nobody asked the question, how are you going to pay for it? Nobody asked the question, how is it going to make money? How is it going to be profitable? But the Postal Service, Donald Trump, time and time again, they finally got something, but they're under constant attack because they're not, quote unquote, according to Donald Trump, profitable. Guess what? They're not called the postal business. No, they're called the Postal Service. The word service is in the name. It's right there. It's Postal Service. What does that mean? That means they don't have to be profitable. That means what their job is to provide an essential service to the American people at an affordable price, which they do. And the people doing this essential service are getting paid a salary to do so. And they're citizens of the country who then use that salary in the economy. That's how a service works. It's unbelievable we even have these conversations. It's unreal.
Well, one of the problems with the Postal Service finances is that the Republicans have been trying to kill it. They passed, I think it was when Bush was president, the Postal Service has to pay for all its pension costs. It has to pay up front. Nobody else, no other business, no other government agency is required to do this. They did this to kill it. And it's one of the things, if you're going to be mad at Obama and the Democrats, that they could have easily handled his first 2 years when he controlled Congress. They would have had the people behind them. It would have been very easy to undo that legislation. So the Postal Service is surviving under the weight of this unnecessary debt. So if it's not profitable, that's why. And, everybody's had some problem with mail service, but for the most part, it's, what is it, 50 cents now? I can't remember. I got the forever stamp, so I don't even know what it costs.
I always get the forever too.
And but I can send a letter across town here in New York City, or I can send a letter to Hawaii or Alaska. It's still 50 cents. It usually arrives when they say. So come on, it's a target. It's a right-wing target to attack government services, to attack public employees, and also I think it's also racist. People know that many public employees are Black, so it's seen as a Black person's job. So that's another way to attack it. So we have this necessary service that everybody needs, that everybody wants, that is a bargain by any definition, and they still want to kill it. But that's what happens when the Democrats, we have a far-right party and a center-right party. Yeah. And because we don't have a party that stands up for us, this is the kind of thing we get.
Yeah, and it's just, and I think it's really a reflection of the conditioning of the American people, and the media plays a role in this, and I mean, it all plays a role in this. I mean, especially with the pandemic, we have found out we are a capitalism death cult. That's essentially what we are in this country. Yep. And it's like, you're taught where it's just like, well, they're not profitable. They're not profitable. They're not profitable. They're not profitable. And it's like, do you ask if your police force is profitable? Do you ask, like, where else? Do you ask if the military-industrial complex is profitable? Do you ask, like, why are you not asking? Which they are profitable for some people.
Yes.
But,
not the way anybody that helps us.
Right.
But this is decades of propaganda. I mean, that's the word. It's just propaganda. And it has seeped into people's consciousness. Government is bad. It started with Reagan. Any government is bad. It's always bad. Small government is the best thing for you. And that's just not true, not by any stretch of the imagination, not by any measure. And that's why people so often fall prey to this. And even things that we want, and because then We don't have a political party that fights for us. We're the only, and we should stop calling ourselves an advanced country, by the way, but that's the category we're always put in. The only one that doesn't provide free healthcare for everybody. And so in the middle of a pandemic, you have those people who are lucky enough to have insurance. It's connected to your job. We've got how many millions unemployed now? What is it, 40 million people unemployed who obviously have lost their health insurance and can't even access their unemployment benefits. So we have this, as you said, a capitalism death cult, and people are so beaten down and so propagandized about doing for themselves, about the system working the way it should, about government being bad. And it seeps into people's consciousness. If you're not careful, it's kind of like music. You know how there's a song that was a hit when you were a kid, and then years later you find yourself singing along. You're like, how do I still remember those lyrics? That's what it's like when you're told time after time and there's no pushback, no other narrative allowed. The media going along with it. So that's where we are now. People either defend the things that are making their lives miserable, or they literally don't know how to fight back and don't know how to speak up for themselves.
With the music analogy, you're really preaching to the choir. I think the last thing that will go from my memory is either song lyrics or just really random facts about rock and roll and the Beatles that has served no purpose in my life necessarily, other than like a conversation when something comes on in the car where my wife has to pretend like she finds it interesting. You know, like that'll happen. We'll have like a Spotify station on. And I'm like, you know, that this is actually how the distorted guitar happened. And the reason it happened was because they dropped the amplifier on the way to the studio and it sounds distorted. And then they were like, that's cool. And that's how. And she goes, okay. And that's.
Is that true, by the way? Or were you?
Yes. The song Rocket 88. You know that song?
I don't know.
Rocket 88. It's a classic. And I forget the first. I mean, it's been covered many, many times. And I forget actually the original artist. But, you know, when they went to record Rocket 88, on the way to the studio, the guitarist dropped their amplifier. And when they plugged it in, it was like kind of like it was, but they started playing it and they were like, this sounds really cool. And they liked it so much that later they invented pedals that could give you that sound. And that's how the distorted guitar happened. Yeah.
Interesting. I like that story.
Well, there you go. That'll probably be in my short term for another, you know, however long, probably as long as I'm alive. That'll be, you know.
Good story. But that's but yeah, it is but that's how that's why Americans believe what they believe. Americans don't like to think of themselves as being propagandized. But we are very much so in school, by the media, by politicians, and we literally. Even the thing that I find most disturbing is that people who want to be informed are still not informed. So if you read the New York Times or the Washington Post or listen to NPR or watch MSNBC, you still don't know what you should know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you actually know the opposite of what you should know. You know, I mean, and you go into, you mentioned recently like the defense companies and stuff like that. When you watch the corporate media, you know, and you watch their commercials, you hear commercials by Raytheon and by oil and gas and by all these institutions. And here's the deal. They're not trying to get the word out. Everybody who has a car knows that if they don't put gasoline in it, it doesn't go. Everyone knows that. Nobody needs to see a commercial like, shit, it's been sitting in the driveway for months. I didn't know why. Nobody needs to see that commercial. Right. Similarly, nobody is in the market to buy a tank anytime soon. Right. You know, well, I guess except for police department, but nobody else. So they're not trying to get the word out to you, the consumer. They're trying to buy favorable coverage, and they're trying to make sure that things that contradict their interests never get talked about. That's why you never hear an honest report about a social movement. That's
Nope.
why you never hear an honest report about the environment, about climate change. They sugarcoat it all.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your